Agatha Raisin and the Garden Party Gone Wrong. On a bright summer morning in Carsely, as villagers bustled around the manor preparing for the garden party, Agatha noticed a tense whisper behind the rose bushes, and suddenly the cheerful day felt charged with secrets that threatened to unravel everything. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Drop your answer in the comments. I always enjoy learning more about our wonderful community. And do not forget to like and subscribe, it will motivate me for more mysteries every day. Now, let's get cozy and begin tonight's story. Chapter 1. A sunny day with shadows underfoot. The morning sun cast a gentle gold over Carsely as Agatha Raisin stepped onto the manor lawn. She paused a moment, enjoying the quiet before the village descended in cheerful chatter. The Harrington estate looked almost theatrical, with bright banners fluttering and tables arranged in soft arcs. Agatha liked order, and she walked the grounds with the focus of someone determined to avoid surprises. The gardeners scurried between flower beds, trimming edges and shifting crates, though one seemed oddly jumpy. He kept glancing toward the hedge as if expecting someone to step out and question him. Agatha made a mental note, since nervous people often knew more than they cared to admit. She continued along the central path, heels crunching lightly against the gravel in a steady rhythm. The scent of roses and fresh lemon polish rose from the tables, merging into something pleasantly summery. She examined each setup, adjusting napkins, straightening chairs, and brushing stray leaves from linen cloths. The party mattered, not only because it welcomed Eleanor Harrington but because Agatha refused chaos. She enjoyed hosting events that looked seamless, even when they demanded relentless attention behind the scenes. Eleanor approached then, her dress catching the sunlight in soft pale tones that should have felt light. Instead, something tight in her smile suggested worry, though she tried to mask it with polite charm. Agatha greeted her warmly, yet she couldn't help noting the faint tremor in Eleanor's hands. "Long morning?" Agatha asked, though she already suspected there was more behind that strained expression. Eleanor laughed softly, but the sound lacked its usual brightness, settling instead into something brittle. She spoke quickly about table arrangements, her words tumbling out as if rehearsed rather than natural. Agatha listened closely, sensing that Eleanor wanted to steer the conversation away from anything personal. After a moment, Eleanor excused herself, claiming she needed to check the refreshment trays near the gazebo. Agatha watched her leave, wondering why a simple party seemed to press on Eleanor like a burden. She turned back to the grounds, noting a small box half hidden beneath a serving table. It was out of place, and Agatha crouched to open it, finding only ribbon scraps inside. The ribbons looked torn hastily, as if someone had searched the box in a hurry. She set it aside, feeling a small prickle of suspicion that didn't match the cheerful decorations. The gardener reappeared nearby, nearly dropping a watering can when he noticed Agatha watching him. He muttered something about misplaced tools before rushing off, avoiding her eyes entirely. Agatha straightened slowly, her mind turning these small oddities over as she continued her inspection. The decorations were lovely, yet the undercurrent of tension felt like a faint breeze stirring beneath calm skies. She tried to shake it off, reminding herself that parties often brought nerves, especially for newcomers. Still, she sensed that Eleanor's worry ran deeper than concern over table settings or flower choices. The breeze carried laughter from the village path as early guests began arriving in small groups. Agatha straightened her jacket, preparing to greet them with confidence while keeping her eyes open. She walked toward the entrance arch, letting the warm sunlight settle her nerves just a little. The garden shimmered, petals glowing, and for a moment she allowed herself to enjoy the beauty. Yet even in that calm moment she kept thinking about Eleanor's hesitant smile and restless energy. Something in the air felt unfinished, like a note held too long without resolution. Agatha trusted her instincts, and today they whispered that the party would bring more than sunshine. She drew a steady breath, readying herself for whatever the afternoon might reveal. For now she stepped forward, determined to guide the day with her resolve. Agatha walked toward the rose displays, letting the soft colors draw her in as she checked each arrangement with practiced care. The roses curved along the path in bright rows, their petals glowing under the warm light. She leaned closer to a cluster of pale blossoms, appreciating how carefully they had been shaped for the party. While she admired them, a faint murmur drifted from behind the tall arch. It wasn't the gentle conversation of guests but a tense, hurried whisper. Agatha paused, listening. She recognized Eleanor's voice, strained in a way she hadn't heard before. Another voice, deeper and unfamiliar, answered sharply, its edge carrying through the leaves with surprising force. Agatha felt the shift instantly, sensing conflict where calm should have been today. Curiosity tugged at her, and she moved a little closer, careful not to disturb the roses as she edged along the archway. Eleanor's voice rose in a brief, pleading whisper, though the leaves muddled her exact words. The man responded quickly, his tone low but unmistakably insistent, as if demanding something he refused to leave without. Agatha could see only fragments of their figures through the branches, yet their rigid stances revealed enough. Eleanor stood with her shoulders tight, while the man leaned in with an intensity that unsettled the peaceful garden. Agatha hesitated, unsure whether to interrupt or wait, the tension in the air prickling against her skin like a warning she shouldn't ignore. Their urgency suggested hidden trouble just beneath the morning's brightness. Unable to watch silently any longer, Agatha stepped around the arch and cleared her throat in a polite but unmistakable cue. The argument stopped instantly as if someone had cut a cord. Eleanor jumped slightly, turning toward Agatha with a startled expression that vanished too slowly to appear natural. Beside her, the man stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he took in Agatha's sudden appearance. He had sharp features and a guarded look, the kind of expression people wore when caught somewhere they didn't belong. Before Agatha could introduce herself or ask anything, he muttered a curt remark under his breath and stepped away from Eleanor, distancing himself with a speed that suggested urgency rather than courtesy, as he retreated deeper along the shaded garden path. Eleanor reached after him impulsively as if hoping to call him back, but her hand dropped before she spoke. The man gave her one final look, sharp with unspoken meaning, then disappeared behind the hedge without hesitation. Agatha watched him go, noting the tension in his shoulders and the quick, purposeful stride that didn't match a casual garden visit. When he was finally out of sight, a heavy quiet remained. Eleanor turned back to Agatha wearing a fragile smile, one that cracked slightly at the corners despite her determined effort. "Family matters," she said softly, lifting a hand in a vague gesture meant to dismiss concern, though her eyes told a different story entirely. Agatha sensed tension lingering behind her calm tone like hidden worry. Agatha kept her voice gentle as she stepped closer, aware that pushing too hard would only make Eleanor retreat. "He seemed rather upset," she said, watching Eleanor's reaction closely. Eleanor avoided her gaze, brushing a loose curl from her cheek with a shaky motion that betrayed her nerves far more than her words did. "It's nothing serious," she insisted, though the tremor in her voice suggested anything but reassurance. The roses rustled lightly in the breeze, scattering a few petals onto the path like small fallen clues. Agatha felt the atmosphere shift again, the bright morning no longer entirely peaceful. A question settled in her thoughts, quiet yet persistent. What trouble had just walked away? She knew unanswered questions rarely stayed buried for very long. Chapter 2. The party begins and so do the secrets. The first wave of villagers entered the Harrington Manor grounds with cheerful chatter, their footsteps blending with the playful music drifting from the small quartet near the gazebo. Sunlight gleamed across trays of pastries arranged in perfect rows, flaky tarts filled with berries, small cakes dusted with sugar, and crisp biscuits shaped like flowers to match the garden's theme. Glass pitchers of iced tea and elderflower lemonade sparkled beside bowls of sliced fruit. Everything looked picturesque, almost too polished, as though someone had swept every corner in an attempt to erase whatever worries lingered beneath the surface. Agatha stationed herself near the main table, greeting arrivals with polite charm and sharp observation. Mrs. Bloxby approached first, offering her gentle smile and a dish of homemade scones wrapped in a floral cloth. She praised the garden's beauty with sincere admiration, her voice warm enough to soften even the most hurried heart. Agatha appreciated her presence. Mrs. Bloxby brought a calm steadiness that the party seemed to need. Behind her came Roy Silver, bright as ever, waving dramatically as though announcing himself to a grand stage rather than a village lawn. His colorful jacket drew amused glances, and he leaned in close to Agatha with conspiratorial energy as he whispered something about spotting a suspiciously handsome stranger earlier. His flair never failed to add liveliness, even when his stories leaned toward exaggeration. By midday, the party had settled into its familiar rhythm. Guests wandered between tables, sampling treats and admiring Eleanor's garden beds, which were neatly arranged in curved patterns that encouraged slow, leisurely strolling. A pair of enthusiastic gossipers hovered near the trellised walkway, murmuring eagerly about the Harrington family's move to Carsely. Their voices rose and fell in bursts, barely contained behind their fans. Agatha caught words like mysterious past and unexpected guest, reminding her of the tense exchange she had witnessed near the roses earlier. She filed their chatter away, knowing that idle gossip occasionally revealed slivers of truth in unexpected places. Across the lawn, Eleanor Harrington floated between groups of visitors, offering polite comments and strained smiles. She listened when spoken to, but her eyes drifted often, scanning the garden as though searching for someone or bracing for another unwelcome appearance. Whenever a guest approached too eagerly, she stiffened before composing herself again. Agatha watched her closely, noting each distracted pause, each moment where Eleanor seemed to forget her surroundings entirely. It was subtle, almost graceful in its restraint, but Agatha recognized the signs of someone torn between hosting and worrying. The village vicar chatted with a retired teacher near the dessert table, their conversation punctuated by bursts of laughter that contrasted sharply with Eleanor's quiet unease. Children chased bubbles blown by a volunteer near the pond, their delighted squeals floating across the lawn. For a moment the party felt blissfully normal, the kind of idyllic gathering people looked back on fondly. Still, Agatha sensed an undercurrent running beneath the cheerfulness, a quiet shift in tone that wasn't visible to everyone. She attributed it partly to Eleanor's troubled mood, though she suspected there was more behind it than simple nerves. As Agatha walked past a table of sandwiches, she overheard a pair of men speaking in low voices. One mentioned seeing someone lurking near the back hedge, while the other dismissed it as a lost guest. The remark stirred something familiar in Agatha, echoing the uneasy feeling that had followed her since morning. She made a mental note to check the hedge later, though she kept her expression neutral, not wanting to stir alarm. She joined Mrs. Bloxby again, exchanging pleasant conversation as guests continued to filter through the entrance arch. Over the courtyard, Agatha caught Eleanor casting another worried glance toward the far corner of the garden. Whatever she feared, she hid it poorly. The party continued with its charming noise, but Agatha sensed the first hints of a mystery quietly unfolding beneath the summer brightness. The first scream wasn't a dramatic one, it was sharp, small and clipped, the kind of sound a person makes when shock hits before fear. Agatha had just accepted a glass of lemonade from Mrs. Bloxby when Eleanor Harrington's cry sliced through the cheerful chatter, turning every head toward the rose-lined terrace. "My bracelet," Eleanor gasped, her face drained of color. "It's gone." The crowd around her thickened instantly. Guests abandoned teacups, conversations, and polite laughter as if yanked by invisible strings. Even Roy Silver, who had been loudly describing his terribly stressful London life, froze mid-gesture. Agatha pushed her way through the ring of onlookers. "What exactly is missing?" she asked, though she already knew. Only something valuable or symbolic could produce that expression on Eleanor's face. "The emerald bracelet," Eleanor whispered. "The one from my grandmother. I wore it today because it felt right. But it's gone. I took it off for just a moment." Mrs. Bloxby laid a comforting hand on her arm. "Perhaps it slipped into a pocket or under the tablecloth?" Eleanor shook her head hard. "No. I set it on the small wooden table near the pergola while adjusting the flower bunting. I swear I did." Agatha caught the tremor in her voice. Eleanor wasn't merely upset, she was rattled to her core. "Let me help you retrace your steps," Agatha offered, already shifting into investigation mode. The villagers stepped aside instinctively. Agatha Raisin, after all, had earned a reputation for sniffing out trouble faster than anyone believed possible. Together they walked toward the pergola, the party murmuring behind them like a disturbed beehive. Agatha noted everything: the rustle of dresses, the darting eyes of nosy neighbors, and the subtle way certain guests leaned closer than necessary, thirsty for drama. The small table beside the pergola looked innocent enough at first glance: polished wood, a vase of hydrangeas, and neatly arranged napkins. But Agatha's eyes narrowed. The hydrangea vase sat slightly askew, its water line uneven. The napkins were no longer folded flat but rumpled, as if someone had rifled through them. And on the far corner of the table, a faint streak of dust suggested something had been lying there, something recently moved. "You're sure this is where you left it?" Agatha asked. "Yes," Eleanor replied with shaky certainty. "Right here. I was fixing that garland," she pointed upward, "and I slipped it off because the clasp kept catching." Agatha reached out and tilted the vase slightly. A fine scattering of grit clung to the base, fresh, disturbed. "Someone's been at this table," she murmured. Eleanor swallowed. "You mean, someone took it?" "I'm not saying that yet," Agatha said carefully. "But something isn't adding up." She crouched down, scanning the grass beneath the table. No glint of green gems. No chain. Not even a broken clasp. "It wouldn't have just fallen," Agatha concluded, standing again. Behind them the party pressed closer. Voices whispered. "Maybe it's a prank?" "Emeralds aren't prank material." "I saw someone walking near that table earlier." Agatha spun. "Who?" A nervous guest, Jeanette Pember, blinked rapidly. I can't remember who exactly. Someone in a dark jacket. They were carrying a plate of pastries. I assumed they were just cutting through." Agatha filed that away. "Did they touch the table?" Jeanette hesitated. "Maybe. Their arm brushed it, I think." Eleanor wrung her hands. "Please, Agatha. I can't take another disaster today." Agatha placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "We'll find it. But you need to think clearly. When you removed the bracelet, did anyone approach you? Anyone speak to you? Even briefly?" Eleanor thought for a long, painful moment. "No. At least, I don't think so. But I was distracted. Too many guests arriving at once." Agatha exhaled slowly. That was enough time for anyone at all, to walk past, notice the glittering heirloom and slip it into a pocket. She returned her attention to the disturbed napkins. Someone had rummaged here. Someone confident enough to do it during a bustling party. Someone who knew the bracelet's value, or its meaning. Agatha stepped back and surveyed the crowd. Laughter resumed in awkward spurts, but attention threaded through the garden now, as unmistakable as a storm on the horizon. The party continued, yes, but something darker had settled over the Harrington estate. And Agatha had the sinking feeling this missing bracelet was only the beginning. Chapter 3, Clues Among the Camellias. The moment Agatha stepped away from the pergola, Eleanor appeared at her side again, this time pale, tight-lipped, and visibly trembling. She touched Agatha's arm lightly, her fingers cold as porcelain. "Please, could we speak somewhere private?" Agatha didn't hesitate. She guided her toward a tall hedge of camellias, their glossy leaves whispering faintly in the breeze. Here, hidden from the curious eyes and the low hum of speculative gossip, Eleanor finally exhaled as though she'd been holding her breath for hours. Agatha studied her closely. "All right. What is it you didn't say earlier?" Eleanor pressed her back against the hedge, steadying herself. "The bracelet, it wasn't just valuable, Agatha. It belonged to my sister." Her voice cracked and something soft and wounded flickered across her face. "My late sister." Agatha's posture softened. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize." "No one does," Eleanor whispered. "Most people think it was simply a family heirloom. They don't know the real story behind it." She paused, eyes filling with a distant, haunted memory. "It was the last gift she ever gave me before everything fell apart." Agatha felt the shift immediately. This wasn't about losing a piece of jewelry. This was about reopening a scar. "What happened between you?" Agatha asked gently. Eleanor looked away, fingers twisting in the hem of her sleeve. "We had disagreements. Deep ones. Painful ones. And the night before she Before the accident, she gave me that bracelet. She said she wanted to make things right. Her throat tightened. I didn't accept her apology fully. I didn't know it would be our last conversation. A single camellia petal drifted down between them. Agatha waited, giving Eleanor space to gather herself. That's why I wore it today, Eleanor continued. Not for show. Not for vanity. I wear it on the days when I feel I need her courage. She closed her eyes. And today? I felt I needed it more than ever. Agatha's brows drew together. Because of the man you argued with? Eleanor flinched, an unmistakable, involuntary reaction. So Agatha had heard correctly. And this confession wasn't simply an outpouring of grief, it was a warning call. Eleanor, Agatha said softly but firmly, you mentioned earlier that it was a family matter. But that wasn't the truth, was it? No, Eleanor's answer came quickly, almost with relief. It wasn't. The wind rustled the camellia hedge, but Eleanor's voice remained low, edged with dread. That man, he isn't exactly family. But he is tied to my sister. He knows things that should have been left buried. And when he found me earlier, he wasn't here to offer condolences or pleasantries. What did he want? To remind me of something I've tried to forget. She swallowed, trembling. To remind me that the past doesn't stay quiet forever. Agatha leaned closer. Is he the person you're afraid of? Eleanor hesitated. And in that hesitation, Agatha sensed the real truth. Eleanor was terrified more than she dared admit aloud. Yes, she whispered. I am. Agatha's eyes sharpened. Did he threaten you? Not in so many words. But his presence alone felt like a threat. And now the bracelet is missing. Her voice broke again. Agatha, I can't help but think the two events are connected. Agatha's mind raced, not wildly but with practiced precision. An argument. A mysterious man tied to a deceased sister. A bracelet heavy with emotional weight. And now theft. Eleanor, she said calmly, placing a steadying hand on her arm, I need you to tell me exactly what he said. Eleanor closed her eyes, the memory evidently painful. He said, you can't hide forever. Agatha felt a prickle of cold spread across her shoulders. This was no petty theft. No accidental misplacement. Something darker had begun its slow, inevitable uncoiling around Eleanor Harrington's life. And Agatha had the sinking certainty she was now in the middle of it. Agatha stepped back into the heart of the garden party with a new clarity sharpening her senses. The cheerful music drifting from the quartet sounded slightly off now, as though a hidden string hummed beneath the melody. Guests continued chatting over scones and chilled lemonade, completely unaware that the atmosphere had shifted. Agatha moved slowly, eyes scanning faces, gestures, and small interactions that earlier she might have overlooked. Now every detail felt significant. The first thing she noticed was the gardener, young, wiry, and perpetually jumpy, hovering near a row of trimmed hedges. He kept glancing toward the main path as though expecting someone to confront him. When his gaze accidentally met Agatha's, he startled so abruptly he nearly dropped the rake in his hands. Instead of approaching her with a polite nod, he ducked his head and hurried behind the potting shed, almost disappearing into the shade. Agatha raised an eyebrow. Gardeners weren't typically shy about their work, especially not at the biggest event of the summer. She made a mental note to speak with him later. Anyone that tense at a party meant to be a cheerful display was worth a second look. Continuing forward, she caught sight of Roy Silver standing by the rose arch. Normally, Roy's presence at any gathering meant laughter, dramatic storytelling, and barely contained enthusiasm. But today he seemed oddly subdued. He stood with his back partially turned, whispering urgently to a stranger Agatha didn't recognize. The man was tall, dressed neatly but with a slight stiffness to his posture. His face remained impassive, yet something about the way he held himself suggested he was used to listening rather than speaking. Roy, meanwhile, kept glancing around as if making sure no one approached. When he spotted Agatha a few paces away, he jolted like a child caught passing secrets in a classroom. His smile appeared on command, bright but strained. Agatha. Darling, he called out, waving too broadly. Just giving our guest a bit of a tour. The stranger nodded politely but offered no introduction. Before Agatha could question either of them, Roy latched onto the man's arm and guided him deeper into the garden, clearly determined to escape scrutiny. Agatha let him go for now, watching the two figures disappear behind a trellis heavy with climbing jasmine. She sighed. Roy often attracted unusual characters, but rarely ones who made him look nervous. Whatever he was discussing must have carried weight. Agatha wandered toward the refreshment tables, greeting villagers with a calm politeness that concealed her swirling thoughts. She noticed Mrs. Dunwitty examining a set of antique lanterns with far too much interest for someone who claimed she never cared for decor. She also caught Mr. Tulliver, the postmaster, lingering near the back doors of the manor as if hoping no one would ask him why. A few visitors who had barely spoken to Eleanor before were studying the property with speculative curiosity, eyes drifting toward hallways, locked rooms, and expensive displays. The more Agatha looked, the more she saw subtle hints of tension threaded beneath the festive setting. People weren't simply admiring the Harrington estate, they were assessing it, weighing it, trying to understand what lay behind its polished surface. A faint clatter drew Agatha's attention to the shed behind the fruit trees. The gardener was nowhere in sight now, but the door, which she was certain had been ajar earlier, was firmly locked. A fresh smear of dirt streaked the handle. Agatha approached, listening closely but heard nothing inside. Still, the abrupt lock, the gardener's anxious movements, and the shed's discreet placement away from the main footpaths made her instincts prickle. She stepped back slowly, the image of the missing bracelet flashing in her mind. Eleanor's fear, the argument with the mysterious man, Roy's secretive whispering, the nervous gardener, the villagers who suddenly appeared too invested. The bracelet wasn't just misplaced. It was part of something forming shape in the shadows, a puzzle that stretched far wider than a simple theft at a garden party. And Agatha, ever drawn to mysteries, felt her focus sharpen with a familiar thrill as she quietly continued her rounds, eyes open, ears alert, ready for whatever secret revealed itself next. Chapter 4, When a Perfect Day Unravels. Agatha had just begun forming a plan, question the gardener subtly, corner Roy for a proper explanation, then search for that mysterious stranger, when a piercing cry sliced through the gentle hum of conversation. The quartet paused mid-melody. Birds startled from the nearby oak. Every head snapped toward the refreshment area. A woman stood frozen beside the drinks table, one hand over her mouth, the other pointing downward. At her feet lay Mr. Penshaw, a portly man known for his booming laugh and fondness for iced punch. But now his face was chalk pale, his hat toppled crookedly beside him, and his body sprawled awkwardly across the grass. Chaos erupted instantly. Several villagers rushed forward, calling his name. Others hovered in anxious clusters, murmuring theories under their breath. Someone shouted for water. Someone else insisted he needed space. The neatly arranged atmosphere of the party shattered like thin glass. Agatha pushed her way through the crowd with practiced efficiency. "Everyone step back, give him air," she instructed, dropping to one knee beside him. Mr. Penshaw blinked slowly, disoriented, his breath shallow but steady. "Mr. Penshaw," Agatha said gently, "can you hear me?" He nodded faintly. "Dizzy, everything spun. Right after I took a drink?" His hand lifted weakly toward the table as if pointing to the punch bowl. Agatha glanced at the glass lying overturned nearby, a few drops still clinging to the rim. The grass beneath it glistened damply. She sniffed the liquid but detected nothing unusual beyond the sharp, citrus-sweet scent of the fruit punch. "Has this happened before?" she asked. No, never." He pressed a hand to his temple, squeezing his eyes shut as another wave of dizziness washed over him. The heat of the afternoon pressed heavily over the garden, but Agatha sensed something more than warmth at play. The timing felt too pointed, too sudden, yet she couldn't jump to conclusions. Not yet. Behind her, voices rose to panicked heights. "Is he ill? Did he faint? Was it the heat? Should someone fetch the doctor?" Agatha stayed calm, letting the questions swirl without feeding them. She checked Mr. Penshaw's pulse, quick but stable. His breathing evened slightly, though confusion still clouded his eyes. And then she saw Eleanor. The hostess stood several paces away, rigid as a statue, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles had turned white. Her face had lost all color, and her gaze wasn't on Mr. Penshaw but on the drinks table, specifically the glass he had dropped. Agatha rose and stepped toward her. "Eleanor? Are you all right?" Eleanor startled, as though Agatha had pulled her back from some private nightmare. I'm fine," she said, but her voice trembled. "It's just the shock of it all." But Agatha wasn't convinced. This wasn't ordinary concern for a guest. Something about the collapse had hit Eleanor with unnerving force. "Did you see what happened?" Agatha probed gently. "No," Eleanor whispered. "I was speaking with Mrs. Bloxby when I heard the scream." Her eyes drifted again toward the punch bowl. A faint shiver traveled through her shoulders. For a moment, Agatha thought Eleanor might speak further, reveal whatever fear gripped her. But Eleanor tightened her expression into polite calm and excused herself to check on guests. Agatha's mind churned. A missing bracelet, a tense argument, a mysterious man, a nervous gardener, and now a guest collapsing after taking a drink. The coincidence felt thin. She glanced once more at the punch bowl, its surface rippling softly in the light breeze. The party's tranquility had crumbled, replaced by an undercurrent of quiet dread. And Agatha knew, this was only the beginning of the unraveling. The crowd had slowly begun to disperse once Mr. Penshaw had settled onto a garden bench, a glass of water in hand, blinking as though the world had shifted and returned. Agatha lingered near the drinks table, her eyes scanning carefully, noting the details others overlooked. The pitcher of punch was no longer perfectly aligned with its accompanying glasses. A napkin lay crumpled beneath a small cup, and the tablecloth, smoothed out earlier with precise care, carried faint wrinkles at one corner. Nothing screamed alarm on its own, but in combination the irregularities spoke of subtle disturbance. Agatha crouched slightly, brushing a fingertip over the table's edge. The faint smear of dust beneath the pitcher suggested it had been shifted, likely by someone curious or cautious. Her instincts told her this was more than accidental movement. Her gaze moved across the surrounding guests, their expressions carefully neutral but undeniably curious. She needed to know what they had seen. "Excuse me," she said to a woman nearby, who had been hovering close to the table during the commotion. "Did you notice anything unusual before Mr. Penshaw collapsed?" The woman blinked, frowning. "Well, I suppose I saw someone leaning over the table. A man, I think, but I didn't look closely. I thought he was just pouring himself some punch." Agatha nodded, storing the detail. The man's presence hadn't registered with anyone else, but she knew that small actions often left quiet, telling footprints. "And did anyone approach him or interact with the drinks?" she asked softly. "No," the woman replied, hesitating. "He just moved away quickly after he was finished." Agatha straightened, her mind already threading the fragments together. There was the shifted pitcher, the crumpled napkin, the unnoticed presence of someone who had brushed past the table. Each piece alone could be brushed off as accident. Together, a subtle pattern began to emerge. Nearby, Eleanor Harrington addressed the lingering guests, her voice polite but quivering at the edges. "The party must continue, please. Let us not allow a small mishap to spoil our celebration." She forced a gentle smile, but Agatha caught the tremor in her hands as she adjusted a vase of hydrangeas. Eleanor's composure seemed to demand obedience, yet her pale expression betrayed deep unease. Agatha returned her attention to the table. She noted the placement of the cups, the pitcher, the faint smudges along the rim, and the spacing of napkins. Every detail suggested movement, perhaps deliberate, and she began to suspect that Mr. Penshaw's collapse had not been random. Heat or dizziness alone did not explain the slight shift in position of the items, nor the subtle marks left behind. Questions crowded her mind. Who had brushed against the table? Was the drink tampered with, or was it simply an opportunity seized for mischief? Eleanor's insistence on continuing the party, though understandable, seemed almost like an effort to mask fear. Agatha felt the tension stretching through the garden like a thin, taut wire ready to snap. As she rose from her examination, Agatha glanced over the garden one more time. Hidden tensions threaded through the cheerful gathering, leaving small, quiet hints scattered like seeds waiting to sprout. The elegant summer party's polished surface no longer reassured her. Instead, it teased its secrets, suggesting that patterns once noticed could reveal more than anyone expected. Chapter 5. Threads of Truth and Trouble. Agatha found him near the far end of the garden, crouched over a bed of newly planted petunias, hands trembling slightly as he arranged soil around the roots. The young gardener had avoided her all morning, slipping quietly behind hedges and disappearing when she drew near. Today, however, Agatha wasn't about to let him vanish. "Thomas," she said softly, using his first name, "I need a word with you. Nothing harsh, just a conversation." She knelt beside the flower bed, letting her tone convey calm rather than authority. The gardener froze, dirt crumbling from his hands, eyes darting nervously around the garden as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. I don't know if I should," he whispered. Agatha smiled reassuringly. "It's perfectly safe. Just tell me what you know. No one will be upset." He swallowed, nodding reluctantly. "All right, but only because it's you, Miss Raisin." His voice shook slightly, betraying the effort it took to speak. "I saw someone this morning, near the east side by the shed. They were sneaking around, moving cautiously like they didn't want to be seen." Agatha's mind snapped to the morning's events. The misplaced box near the pergola, the nervous behavior she had noticed earlier. "Can you describe them?" she asked gently. The gardener hesitated, wringing his hands. "It's hard. They wore a long dark coat. I didn't get a good look at the face. I only saw the coat moving between the hedges, then ducking behind the rose trellis. I thought it was one of the villagers at first, but—" His voice trailed, the implication heavy between them. Agatha's eyes narrowed. A dark coat. The same vague silhouette she had glimpsed in Eleanor's heated exchange earlier. The pieces were falling into place faster than she had expected. "Did they notice you?" she pressed. Thomas's hands shook more violently now. I think they did. I froze. I didn't want to be seen. They said something, a warning. I couldn't catch the words, but it was enough to make me back off. I didn't dare tell anyone. I was scared they'd come back if I did." Agatha considered this. A frightened gardener, a threatening presence, a missing bracelet, a collapse at the punch table. The threads were connecting, forming a pattern too precise to be coincidental. "Did you see them go toward the house?" she asked, leaning slightly closer. "No," Thomas replied. "They stayed near the shrubs and then they vanished behind the east hedge. I thought they were gone, but I kept thinking about the bracelet. I knew someone might be after it." He looked at her with pleading eyes. "I didn't want anyone else to get hurt." Agatha placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You did exactly the right thing by keeping calm. Thank you for telling me." She straightened, turning her gaze to the neatly trimmed path that led from the shed to the rose trellis. The sight of it stirred her mind, replaying all the subtle disturbances she'd noticed. The displaced napkin, the rumpled tablecloth, the crumpled box near the pergola. "So," she murmured, "this dark-coated figure, it's likely the same person who confronted Eleanor earlier, isn't it?" Thomas nodded, swallowing hard. "I think so, yes. They wanted something and they weren't afraid to make threats." Agatha's chest tightened slightly. The garden party had begun as a sunny, cheerful event, yet now a shadow had been cast across its bright lawns. Each incident, the missing bracelet, Mr. Penshaw's sudden collapse, the intruder in the hedge, was no longer isolated. Someone had orchestrated parts of this day, and that person had deliberately instilled fear. She glanced at Thomas one last time. "Stay nearby," she instructed softly. "If you see anything else unusual, tell me immediately, no matter how small it seems." He nodded vigorously, relief flickering briefly across his tense features. Agatha rose and stepped back, letting him return to the flowers, while she turned her gaze once more across the garden. A careful observer would notice the subtle tension threading through every smile and polite greeting. And Agatha Raisin, attuned to the unspoken and unseen, knew the next clue could appear anywhere, even where no one dared to look. Agatha found Roy Silver near the edge of the garden, half hidden behind a tall cluster of lavender. He was animatedly waving a hand as if dismissing some imagined concern, though the tight line of his mouth betrayed a different story. She approached cautiously, letting her tone remain light. "Roy," she called softly. "A moment, if you will?" He jumped, turning quickly with a practiced smile. "Ah, Agatha. Of course. Just enjoying the aromatic properties of lavender, you know. Fascinating, really." He gestured vaguely to the flowers. But his eyes flicked nervously toward the rose trellis, the space where she had seen him whispering with the stranger earlier. Agatha raised an eyebrow, folding her arms. "I wondered about that. You were speaking with a man I didn't recognize. Care to explain?" Roy's smile faltered for just a heartbeat, replaced by a shadow of unease. Yes. Well, you know how it is at these gatherings. Curious guests, questions flying, people eager to chat. That sort of thing." Agatha leaned slightly closer, her gaze direct. "Roy, this wasn't casual chit-chat. Your body language, your glances, your posture, suggested otherwise." He exhaled slowly, surrendering in the subtle way only a longtime friend of intrigue could. All right, he muttered. "But you must promise, no gossip, no repeating anything. I don't want Eleanor to be worried unnecessarily." "Of course," Agatha assured him. Roy's eyes darted to the lawn, then back to her, as though weighing every word. "The man," he began quietly, "he asked questions about Eleanor's past. Very pointed questions. Especially about her sister. The late sister." His voice dropped further, almost to a whisper. He seemed interested in every detail, like he was piecing something together. I didn't recognize him. Not at all. But there was an intensity, something too focused for casual conversation. Agatha nodded, absorbing the information. The picture was sharpening in her mind. A dark-coated stranger, questions about a deceased sister, a tense argument with Eleanor, and now Roy's unease confirming the man's probing nature. "Did he say anything else?" Agatha asked, keeping her tone calm. "Nothing specific," Roy replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "But he had a presence, Agatha. You know the sort that makes you feel the room has shrunk around you." I kept my answers brief. Tried to seem casual. I didn't want him to think I knew too much, or too little. Agatha considered his words. Every detail pointed to someone who had knowledge and intent. The timing, the questions, the dark coat, it all aligned with the other incidents that had unfolded that day. The missing bracelet, the nervous gardener, even Mr. Penshaw's sudden collapse. Roy straightened, his face brightening slightly. "I really mustn't overstate it. Just a peculiar man asking peculiar questions, nothing more. I wouldn't want you, or anyone, to imagine danger where there's none." Agatha allowed a faint smile. "Your caution is appreciated, Roy. But I have a feeling you've given me more than you realize." He chuckled, nervously brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. Perhaps. I do worry sometimes. Eleanor's life has a way of attracting unusual attention." Agatha's eyes swept the garden again, noting the mingling guests, the hidden corners, the hushed conversations threading like invisible lines. The net of mystery was closing ever tighter around the Harrington family, and she knew the next move required delicate observation, patience, and a steady hand. Chapter 6. Unlocking What Shouldn't Be Opened. Agatha slipped away from the garden's bright chatter, heading toward the small shed tucked behind the fruit trees. She carried in her pocket the spare key she had borrowed earlier from Eleanor, just in case, a precaution she rarely admitted even to herself. The sun slanted low, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed path, and the faint scent of lavender mingled with the earthy aroma of freshly watered soil. Every step toward the shed seemed heavier, as though the garden itself recognized the tension in the air. The lock clicked smoothly under Agatha's practiced fingers, and the door creaked open, revealing the small, dim interior. She paused, letting her eyes adjust to the gloom. Tools leaned against the walls, rakes, shovels, and neatly stacked pots. Nothing seemed out of place at first glance. But then her gaze fell to the dirt-streaked floor. A single muddy footprint led from the door to the far corner, the sole pattern faint but distinct. Someone had been here recently and they had walked carefully, leaving only that one mark. Agatha knelt, examining it more closely. The print was larger than any of the gardener's boots, too big, too deliberate. Whoever had entered the shed hadn't wanted to be traced, but the soil had betrayed them. Her eyes shifted upward, catching a flash of fabric snagged on a nail protruding from the wooden wall. She approached and tugged gently. A small piece of torn cloth came free. It was dark, deep, almost black navy, and the weave was fine, unmistakably out of place among the coarse gardener's smocks and gloves stored here. Her heart ticked faster. The color matched the coat the gardener had described earlier, the same figure who had slipped through the hedges unseen. Agatha took a steadying breath and moved further into the shed. She spotted a tarp folded over a corner stack of empty crates. Lifting it carefully, she revealed a wooden box, roughly 2 feet long, the kind large enough to hold something valuable, perhaps even delicate. The box was empty. The lid had been slightly ajar, its hinges dusted with soil, as if someone had handled it recently and left it in a hurry. The implications unfurled in Agatha's mind. The intruder had used this shed as a temporary hiding spot. The missing bracelet, the dark-coated figure, the nervous gardener, all threads converging here. Whoever had planned this had thought carefully, choosing a location away from prying eyes yet accessible in case they needed to retrieve their haul. Agatha examined the interior of the shed more closely. The tools were undisturbed, save for a small spade lying half-tipped into a corner, as though it had been brushed aside in haste. Dust covered the floor unevenly, indicating that someone had moved deliberately between the crates and the back wall. Each subtle detail painted a clearer picture. Someone had come, searched for or stored something and left with enough speed to avoid being noticed. She pressed a fingertip to the torn cloth again, letting the texture speak to her trained senses. Whoever had been here hadn't expected it to be discovered so soon, but their haste had left these breadcrumbs. Agatha's mind traced every angle, every possibility. Could the bracelet have been hidden here temporarily? Or had something else been taken or stashed? Agatha straightened, stepping back to survey the shed as a whole. The faint light through the dusty window slats illuminated the single footprint, the snagged cloth, and the empty box. The room felt smaller now, heavy with silent evidence, each item a fragment of a puzzle she had only begun to assemble. She exhaled slowly. The mystery had deepened, tightened its grip around the Harrington estate, and the shed, seemingly innocuous in the bright summer day, had revealed itself as a quiet stage for a careful, unseen hand. Agatha knew that the next moves would require both discretion and courage. And she could feel it. The trail was leading somewhere far more significant than a simple missing bracelet. Agatha approached Eleanor in a quiet corner of the garden, the fragment of dark cloth folded neatly in her hand. Eleanor was arranging flowers along a low hedge, her movements stiff, her gaze fixed on the blooms rather than the guests or the disturbances of the day. "Eleanor," Agatha began gently, holding the cloth out. "I found this in the shed. Does it look familiar?" Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as it hovered over the fabric, and her lips parted, but no words came. She swallowed hard, her knuckles whitening against the edge of the planter. Agatha remained calm, patient, giving her space. Finally, Eleanor exhaled shakily. "Yes," she whispered. That's his coat." Her voice caught, fragile as porcelain. She turned fully to face Agatha, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief, as though the confession had been waiting to escape for years. Agatha nodded gently. "I need to understand, Eleanor. The man you argued with, the intruder in the garden, who is he and why is he here?" Tears gathered at the corners of Eleanor's eyes. "It's my sister," she said, voice quivering. "Her death, it wasn't an accident. Not entirely. There were circumstances. Someone involved who should never have been able to hurt her. That man, the one in the dark coat, he played a part. He knows things, dangerous things. I thought it ended years ago. I thought it was buried. But now he's returned." Agatha's chest tightened. The bracelet, the missing jewelry, the collapse at the punch table, it all began to make a chilling kind of sense. Eleanor's fear wasn't for the party, for appearances, or even for herself in a casual sense. It was genuine, primal, protective. I kept the bracelet safe, Eleanor continued, her voice shaking. Not because of its value but because it belonged to her. It was the last thing she left me, the only thing that felt like a connection. I never imagined someone would try to take it. I never imagined he would come back. Agatha listened carefully, noting the way Eleanor's fingers clutched a stray petal, the slight shake of her shoulders, the quiver in her voice. This was more than grief. This was fear rooted in the knowledge that the past had not forgiven them, and that someone dangerous still walked near. I feel watched, Eleanor admitted, voice dropping to a whisper. Every movement, every stranger in the garden, I feel him there. Watching, waiting. I can't even trust the laughter and chatter around me to be harmless. Every polite smile seems to hide a question, every glance a threat. Agatha placed a reassuring hand over Eleanor's. You're not alone. Whatever he wants, we'll find it first. But I need you to tell me everything you remember about that day, everything that might matter. Eleanor nodded slowly, swallowing a sob. I'll tell you, she said, finally allowing herself to meet Agatha's eyes. I have to. Otherwise, it feels like I'm reliving it alone. The sunlight fell softly across the blooms, but shadows lingered between the petals. Agatha realized that the garden party, with its cheerful laughter and summery elegance, had been a powder keg from the moment guests arrived. Every small misstep, every odd glance, every subtle act of tension now fit into a larger, darker puzzle. And in Eleanor's trembling hands, Agatha saw both the memory of a sister lost and the key to understanding a mystery that had only just begun to unfold. Chapter 7. The mystery blooms into full view. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long, soft shadows across the manicured lawns and flower beds. The warmth of the day had faded, replaced by a gentle, cooling breeze that rustled the petals of roses and camellias alike. Agatha moved quietly through the garden, retracing her steps from the morning, her eyes alert for anything that might have escaped notice. Each displaced napkin, each subtle smudge, each hurried glance now seemed more significant in the fading light. It was near the back gate, partly hidden by a hedge of lilacs, that she spotted him. The dark-coated man, tall and silent, lingered at the edge of the garden as though he belonged to the shadows. His posture was rigid, his movements measured. Agatha's pulse quickened, not in fear but in that sharp, familiar thrill that came with a mystery tightening around her. She approached cautiously, keeping to the deeper shadows behind a line of hydrangeas. The man turned as she drew near, his eyes catching hers for the briefest moment before narrowing in recognition. You're persistent, he said, voice low and controlled. I should have known someone like you wouldn't leave things alone. Persistence often helps, Agatha replied evenly, stepping forward just enough to signal she was unarmed, approachable, but alert. I'd like to understand why you've been sneaking around Eleanor's estate today. The man's jaw tensed. I didn't take anything, he said immediately, almost defensively. I wasn't looking for the bracelet. I need something else. Something she has. Something that belongs to me. Agatha tilted her head, considering. And this belongs to you? You believe Eleanor took it? He stepped closer, the dark fabric of his coat brushing against the tips of the low flowers. She doesn't know its value, only that she has it. I didn't expect anyone else to be watching. I didn't plan to meet her, or you here. His tone softened, almost desperate, but the intensity remained. Agatha studied him closely. The tension in his shoulders, the restless movement of his hands, the subtle quiver in his voice. It was clear he wasn't a villain in the conventional sense. His aggression seemed born of urgency, necessity, perhaps even fear. Why not come forward? She asked, her voice calm, measured. Why all this secrecy? Because, he said, eyes darting toward the house, she would never return it willingly. And the consequences, if the wrong people knew, he trailed off, the weight of unspoken threats hanging in the air. Agatha's mind raced, connecting dots she hadn't fully aligned before. The gardener's nervousness, Roy's whispered caution, Eleanor's pale fright, the missing bracelet. It was a web spun around more than just the heirloom. Something else had been taken, something he wanted back, and it was entangled with the very mystery Eleanor had been trying to keep buried. Show me, she said finally, stepping slightly closer. Help me understand what you're looking for. Then perhaps we can prevent more trouble. The man hesitated, glancing around the secluded part of the garden, where shadows pooled beneath the hedges and flower beds. The dim light softened his features, making him appear less threatening, more human in his desperation. Agatha took a careful breath. Every instinct told her to keep a steady pace, to observe, to listen. This was not a confrontation born of malice but of need. And in need, truths often revealed themselves, layer by layer. The evening air thickened with anticipation. The quiet beauty of the twilight garden belied the tension between them. Agatha felt the threads of the day, hidden glances, unexplained incidents, whispered fears, begin to converge here, in this quiet corner, as if the garden itself had been waiting for this moment to expose its secrets. Agatha stepped back from the dark-coated man, letting his words settle in her mind like stones dropped into still water. Each detail he had shared now pressed against the edges of memory: the mysterious presence in the garden, the gardener's frightened glances, the misplaced bracelet, and the nervous tension in Eleanor's demeanor. Slowly the pieces began to align, forming a larger, more intricate pattern than she had initially imagined. Her thoughts drifted first to the shed. The torn cloth, the footprint, the empty wooden box, they were not random. Someone had used the space deliberately, leaving subtle traces of their passage. And yet, nothing had been taken from the shed itself, not the bracelet, not any obvious item of value. That small realization narrowed the possibilities. Then her mind turned to Eleanor. Her pale, trembling hands, her insistence on keeping the party moving, her emotional reaction when confronted with the fragment of cloth, all suggested that whatever the intruder sought was tied intimately to Eleanor's past. And now it seemed clear: the bracelet was never the goal. It was a cover, a decoy, or perhaps a container for something far more significant. Agatha retraced the path through the shed in her mind, recalling the precise location of the wooden box. It had been large enough to hold a variety of items, and its sudden emptiness suggested it had been accessed recently. Eleanor's hesitation in revealing the full story, combined with the man's urgent but non-violent insistence, led Agatha to a logical conclusion. Something critical, likely a document or a keepsake tied to Eleanor's sister, had been hidden inside the bracelet box. The collapse at the drinks table, initially seeming coincidental, now fit into the framework she was building. Perhaps the intruder had intended to unsettle the party, to divert attention while he searched or ensured the bracelet, or its hidden contents, remained undisturbed. The strands of panic, subtle misplacement, and nervous behavior among the staff were all consistent with someone moving with purpose behind the party's cheerful facade. Agatha exhaled slowly, letting the clarity settle in her mind. The danger was not overtly physical, but it was no less intense. It was emotional, psychological, threaded through secrets and fear, anxiety and misplaced trust. The missing bracelet, the empty shed, the dark coat, and Eleanor's terror were all nodes in a network, and the intruder was following its lines with intent. Her next steps would require both subtlety and tact. She would need to verify her suspicions without alarming Eleanor or tipping off the man. Observing patterns, comparing timelines, and revisiting the shed were essential. Every overlooked clue might now carry significance. Every fragment of memory or overlooked glance could reveal what Eleanor had kept hidden all these years. The garden, now draped in twilight, seemed to hum softly with secrets. The scent of roses lingered, mingling with the earthy aroma of soil and fallen leaves. Agatha felt the familiar thrill of a puzzle drawing closer to resolution, a delicate balance of suspense and empathy. The pieces were clicking into place, and soon she would have the full picture, understanding not just what had been taken or hidden but why and by whom. In the hush of fading light, Agatha realized the mystery had evolved beyond a missing bracelet or a single intruder. It had become a careful unraveling of truths long buried, each revelation guiding her steadily toward the heart of Eleanor's carefully guarded past. Chapter 8: A Garden Party No One Will Forget. The garden had quieted, the sun long set, leaving the soft glow of lanterns to illuminate the winding paths and flower beds. The air carried the mingled scents of roses, lavender, and freshly trimmed hedges, creating a serene backdrop for the evening's delicate confrontation. Agatha led Eleanor and the dark-coated man to a small circular clearing near the fountain, where lanterns hung like suspended fireflies, casting gentle pools of light. "Here," Agatha said softly, stepping back to allow them space. "This will give us a calm setting. Let's speak openly." Eleanor's hands trembled as she clutched the empty bracelet box, the object now heavy with unspoken history. Her eyes, usually so composed, darted between Agatha and the man, glistening with unshed tears. I don't know if I can," she admitted, voice fragile. "I've held on to this for so long and I've been afraid." Agatha placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You can, Eleanor. It's safe. And it's time the truth came out." The man's posture shifted from guarded to cautious, curiosity flickering behind the tension in his eyes. "I just want to understand," he said quietly, his voice low but steady. "I never wanted to cause harm." Eleanor nodded, swallowing a sob. "It's a letter," she confessed at last. "My sister, before she died, she wrote it. She wanted to clarify something important, something that explains everything. I kept it hidden in the bracelet box because I didn't know who to trust, and I feared it would fall into the wrong hands." She lifted the letter with trembling fingers, the paper yellowed and slightly worn at the edges. "I mislaid it earlier in my panic and I thought someone might steal it." The man's eyes widened as Eleanor extended the letter toward him. This proves I wasn't guilty of what your family believed?" His voice was almost incredulous, a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Yes," Eleanor replied, voice catching. "Everything your critics accused you of was a misunderstanding, exaggerated by fear and grief. My sister wanted to clear the record, but I didn't know how to handle it. I kept the bracelet box as a safe place, and then everything spiraled out of control today." Agatha watched carefully, noting the subtle relaxation in the man's posture, the tension easing from his shoulders. Eleanor's confession, though painful to voice, was the key to dissolving years of suspicion and fear. The garden's lanterns reflected off the petals, bathing the scene in soft, forgiving light. I only wanted the truth," the man said finally, taking a careful step forward. "Not the bracelet, not revenge. Only to set things right." Eleanor's hands shook as she nodded. "I see that now. I should have trusted you sooner, and I'm sorry for the years of doubt and fear." Agatha smiled, the satisfaction of a puzzle resolved warming her chest. "And now it's all out in the open. No miscommunication, no secrets. Just understanding." She gestured to the garden around them. "Even here in the lantern light, it feels as though the air itself is lighter." The man carefully took the letter, reading it with a reverence Eleanor had long denied herself. Slowly the weight of decades of misjudgment seemed to lift. Eleanor's shoulders eased, her breathing lengthened, and a faint smile touched her lips. Agatha stepped back, letting the quiet of the garden embrace them. The summer night was calm again, the gentle glow of the lanterns reflecting on petals and leaves. A mystery that had shadowed Eleanor's life was finally reconciled, a misunderstanding resolved and a fragile peace restored, all under the serene beauty of the garden she had feared might witness another tragedy. The evening's tension faded into gentle laughter, relieved sighs, and the soft hum of contentment. Agatha allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The threads of secrecy had been untangled, and the garden, once a place of subtle fear, was now a stage for closure, understanding, and the quiet magic of truth revealed. The lantern's gentle glow flickered across the garden paths as the last of the guests began to leave, their voices soft, laughter fading, unaware of the storm of emotions that had quietly swirled beneath the day's cheerful surface. The clink of teacups being gathered, the rustle of chairs returned to their places, and the soft shuffle of feet along gravel paths created a rhythm that matched the slow settling of tension in the air. Eleanor moved toward a small cluster of planters near the rose arch. There, tucked behind a clay pot, lay her emerald bracelet, glinting faintly in the lantern light. Relief washed over her face as she picked it up, fingers brushing gently against the familiar metal and stones. She looked over at Agatha, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you," Eleanor said quietly, her voice steady but warm. "For everything. I couldn't have faced this without you." Agatha inclined her head with a small smile. You handled it bravely. The truth sometimes needs patience, courage, and a little nudge from someone who notices what's hidden in plain sight. The gardener emerged from the shadows, wiping his hands on a cloth, his expression lightened from the fear he had carried all day. He nodded toward Agatha, a quiet acknowledgement of the role she had played in untangling the day's mysteries. Agatha wandered slowly along the garden paths, her footsteps soft on the gravel. The roses, camellias, and lavender beds were now bathed in the cool, silver glow of the moon. Each flower seemed to hold a memory of the day, the laughter, the suspense, the fear, and finally the revelation that had brought peace. She inhaled deeply, letting the scent of blossoms and freshly turned soil fill her senses. Her mind reflected on the intricate weave of human behavior, the small fears, the miscommunications, and the secrets we keep, sometimes even from ourselves. Today had revealed how easily assumptions can grow into suspicion, how courage can restore understanding, and how the simplest objects, like a bracelet or a letter, may carry far more weight than they seem to hold. As she passed the empty shed, she noticed the faint trace of the dark-coated man's presence earlier, a reminder of how close curiosity and danger often walk together. She smiled slightly to herself. In Carsely, nothing stayed hidden for long, especially with keen eyes like hers observing the quiet patterns beneath ordinary life. The final lanterns flickered in the breeze, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed hedges. Agatha paused at the garden gate, looking back over the softly illuminated paths and flower beds. Peace had returned, the summer night carrying a gentle serenity over the manor grounds. Guests had gone, mysteries resolved, and yet the quiet promised more secrets to uncover in time. With a final glance at the sparkling bracelet safely returned to Eleanor, Agatha turned toward home. The evening air was cool, the sky a velvet expanse sprinkled with stars. She walked with a slow, contented pace, her thoughts already drifting toward the next puzzle, the next quiet unraveling of a human story. Carsely settled around her, calm and cozy once more as Agatha Raisin, tired but satisfied, disappeared down the lane, ready for the mysteries that tomorrow, and the days beyond, might bring.